Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right and still going nowhere? You wake up early. You stay late. You push through 12-hour days while everyone else seems to clock out at 5. And yet, somehow, you're still stuck. You watch someone with half your effort get promoted. You see others move ahead while you're still grinding in the same place. And that quiet frustration starts to grow. You don't complain. You don't quit. You just tell yourself one thing. I need to work harder. Because that's what we've been taught, right? Hard work equals success. Effort guarantees results. So you double down. Less sleep, more hours, more sacrifice. And deep down, even when doubt whispers in your ear, you silence it with the same belief. If you just push a little more, it will finally pay off. This is where our story begins, with a powerful idea, and a dangerous one. The belief that extreme hard work automatically guarantees success. And in a quiet farming valley, that belief lived inside a man named Thomas. Thomas was 32 years old. He had inherited a modest 10-acre farm from his father. It wasn't large, it wasn't modern. But to him, it represented something sacred. Legacy, honor, responsibility. And above all else, Thomas believed one thing. Hard work is the only honest path to success. Every morning, he woke at 4 o'clock, long before the sun touched the horizon. While the rest of the valley slept, he was already in the fields. He planted every seed by hand. He carried heavy buckets of water, row after row. He knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds until his fingers cracked and bled. Neighbors suggested modern tools, irrigation systems, machinery that could save hours. Thomas refused. To him, tools felt like shortcuts, and shortcuts felt like weakness. If something was built with less sweat, it must be worth less. Exhaustion wasn't a warning sign. It was proof. Proof that he cared. Proof that he was disciplined. Proof that he deserved success. The more he suffered, the more righteous he felt. Because in Thomas's world, pain was not a problem. It was a badge of honor. Right next to Thomas's land lived a man named Richard. Same valley, same soil, same size farm. He was the same age. He even started with less money. But everything else looked different. Richard began his day at 8 in the morning. He stopped at 2 in the afternoon. 6 hours of focused work, no more. He used a modern irrigation system. He hired part-time help during harvest. He spent evenings reading, resting, traveling with his family. And somehow, his farm produced twice as much. Twice the yield, twice the profit, half the hours. This fact haunted Thomas. Because if 2 men start in the same place, but one thrives while the other struggles, the difference cannot be luck. It must be thinking. Now pause for a moment. Look at your own life. Is there someone working fewer hours but moving faster than you? Don't judge them. Study them. Then the valley was tested. A brutal drought arrived without warning. The river thinned. The soil cracked. Water became scarce for everyone. Every farmer faced the same problem. But they did not respond the same way. Thomas saw the drought as a signal to push harder. If the land demanded more, he would give more. He began waking at 3 in the morning instead of 4. In the dark, before sunrise, he carried bucket after bucket from a distant well. 40 trips, sometimes 50. His shoulders burned, his back throbbed, his hands trembled. But in his mind, one sentence kept repeating: hard work never fails. Meanwhile, Richard did something quieter. He adjusted his irrigation system to water during cooler hours, reducing evaporation. Less waste, more precision. One man increased effort, the other increased efficiency. The drought didn't create the problem, it revealed it. Day after day, Thomas pushed his body past its limits. He told himself the pain was temporary, the exhaustion was necessary. The breakthrough was close. But on the 15th day of that relentless routine, something inside him gave out. He was carrying another heavy bucket across the field when his vision blurred. The ground tilted. His legs stopped responding. The bucket slipped from his hands, spilling precious water into the dust. Thomas fell to his knees between rows of struggling crops, gasping for air. His heart pounded wildly. His body felt hollow. When Sarah found him, he couldn't even stand. At the hospital, the doctor spoke plainly. Severe dehydration, extreme exhaustion, on the edge of a heart attack. If you continue like this, the doctor warned, you may not see the next harvest. That night, lying in a quiet hospital room, Thomas stared at the ceiling. For the first time, he didn't feel tired. He felt shaken, not by the drought, not by bad luck, but by a deeper question he had never allowed himself to ask. What if the problem wasn't how hard he worked, but how he thought? That night, in the stillness of the hospital room, Thomas finally said the words he had been avoiding. I did everything right, he whispered to Sarah. I worked harder than anyone. I sacrificed everything. Why am I still failing? There was no anger in his voice, only confusion. Sarah held his hand gently. She didn't argue. She didn't criticize. She simply said, maybe hard work isn't the whole answer. Maybe there's something you haven't learned yet. That sentence lingered in the air long after the lights were turned off. She didn't attack his effort. She questioned his method. And that small shift changed everything. For the first time, Thomas stopped defending himself. He started wondering, what if success wasn't about doing more, but about doing differently? Let me ask you something. When was the last time you questioned your approach, not your effort? Drop a comment below. What's one area in your life where working harder hasn't solved the problem? 3 days after leaving the hospital, Thomas did something he had been too proud to do for years. He walked across the dirt road, past the fence line, up to Richard's front door. Each step felt heavier than the buckets he used to carry. This wasn't about water. It was about ego. He knocked. When Richard opened the door, there was no judgment in his eyes, only concern. I heard what happened, Richard said softly. Come in. They sat on the porch overlooking Richard's green, thriving fields. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Thomas took a breath. For the first time, his voice carried humility instead of certainty. I work twice your hours, he said. I give everything I have. But you work less and produce more. I need to understand how. This was the real turning point. Not the collapse, not the drought, but the moment he chose learning over pride. Richard didn't start with numbers. He didn't talk about profit or productivity. Instead, he walked Thomas to his tool shed. Inside, he picked up 2 axes. One was old and dull. The other was sharp, polished, almost gleaming in the light. Imagine 2 woodcutters, Richard said calmly. He handed Thomas the dull axe and pointed to a thick log. Try. Thomas swung. The blade bounced off. He swung again and again. After several heavy strikes, he was breathing hard. The log barely showed a mark. Then Richard picked up the sharp axe. 1 swing, the blade bit deep. 3 more swings, the log split clean in 2. Richard looked at him. One man swings all day without stopping, he said. The other stops to sharpen his tool. By sunset, the second man cuts more trees. And in that quiet moment, Thomas understood something painful. And he hadn't been failing because he lacked effort. He had been swinging a dull axe for years, confusing motion with progress. Richard didn't stop at the metaphor. He walked Thomas out to the fields. "Look closely," he said. Instead of hauling buckets by hand, thin black lines ran quietly along the soil. A drip irrigation system. "It cost me money at the beginning," Richard explained. "I had to plan it, install it, adjust it. But now, it waters the crops directly at the roots. No waste, no heavy lifting, and it works even while I sleep." Thomas stood there, silent. 6 hours of hauling water, replaced by minutes of supervision. That was the difference. Richard wasn't trading hours for output. He was building systems that multiplied output. That is leverage. Brute force drains you. Systems free you. One creates exhaustion. The other creates scalability. And here's the question for you. What are you still doing manually in your life or business that could be systemized? If one simple system could give you back 5 hours a week, would you build it? Richard then pointed to different sections of his land. "You grow 5 crops," he said. "I grow 2. Thomas frowned. Wasn't more variety safer, more opportunity? But Richard shook his head. "These 2 crops grow best in this soil. I studied the numbers. I focused on what performs, not what looks impressive." Thomas thought about his own fields. 5 different crops, 5 different watering needs, 5 different harvest schedules, 5 different problems. He wasn't running a farm. He was juggling chaos. Richard continued, "When you divide your attention, you divide your excellence. Focus doesn't shrink opportunity. It sharpens it. Mastery comes from depth, not width." Thomas slowly realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't overwhelmed because he worked too little. He was overwhelmed because he tried to do everything. Now, let me ask you, are you building 5 average outcomes when 2 great ones would change your life? Richard wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he said. "I sleep 8 hours. Thomas almost laughed. Sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. But Richard continued calmly. "I exercise in the morning. I take short breaks during the day. When I stop working, I actually stop." He wasn't bragging. He was explaining a strategy. "Because when my mind is clear," Richard said, "I make better decisions. I spot problems early. I avoid expensive mistakes." Thomas thought about his own days, the rushed choices, the overlooked details, the hours wasted fixing errors caused by exhaustion. He had mistaken burnout for dedication, but fatigue clouds judgment. A tired brain reacts. A rested brain thinks. Rest is not laziness. It is maintenance. Energy fuels productivity. Clarity drives strategy. And if your mind is constantly running on fumes, how can it ever lead you forward? Thomas went home that evening with a mind he hadn't felt in years. Not heavy, not defensive. Thinking. The next morning, he did something radical. He worked for 4 focused hours. Then he stopped. Instead of pushing through exhaustion, he sat down with a notebook. He researched irrigation systems. He visited the local agricultural office. He asked questions. He made a plan. Within 2 weeks, he sold equipment he no longer needed and invested in a simple drip system. Installation took 3 days. After that, watering dropped from 6 hours a day to 20 minutes. 20. That saved time didn't disappear. He reinvested it into studying soil quality and planning smarter crop cycles. For the first time, he was building instead of reacting. Let me ask you something. What would happen if you worked 4 focused hours and used 1 hour to improve your system instead of repeating the grind? Would your results change? 6 months passed. The next harvest season arrived quietly, without drama. But the results spoke loudly. Thomas's fields were healthier, water flowed efficiently, the soil was stronger, the crops were consistent. That year, his yield increased by 40%, the best result he had ever seen. Not because he worked 15 hours a day, but because he worked 7 focused hours with intention. Yet the real transformation wasn't measured in numbers. It was measured at the dinner table. For the first time in years, Thomas sat with Sarah without falling asleep mid-conversation. He laughed with his children. He woke up with energy instead of dread. His body grew stronger. His mind grew clearer. Neighbors began to notice. "You're working less," they said, "but you look better." Thomas would simply smile. He wasn't working less. He was finally working right. And that brings us to the truth at the heart of this story. Hard work is necessary, but it is not enough. Effort is the foundation. Strategy is the multiplier. Do not carry water in buckets if you can build a pipeline. Do not confuse being busy with being effective. And please, do not believe that exhaustion is proof of worth. Burnout is not a badge of honor. It is a warning. Real progress comes from systems that create leverage, from focus that creates mastery, from rest that protects clarity. Thomas didn't succeed because he became stronger. He succeeded because he became wiser. He stopped swinging a dull axe out of pride and started sharpening it with intention. Now this is where the story becomes yours. This week, look at one area of your life where you feel stuck. Now, ask yourself honestly, am I pushing harder or thinking smarter? If this message resonated with you, hit the like button so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs permission to work differently. And in the comments, tell me one system you're going to build this week. Because success is not about how long you swing. It's about how sharp your axe is.